Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you. 2005, I attended a drug policy reform conference in Long Beach, California. It was my first. I had written a book. It came out that year, and I was invited to speak to 1,500 people who had assembled at this conference sponsored by the Drug Policy Alliance, which is kind of the granddaddy of American drug policy reform organizations, headquartered in New York. And the executive director of that organization is a brilliant man by the name of Ethan Nadelman, who gave the opening address to the 1,500 people. And he looked out at this sea of people in the grand ballroom at the Sheraton Hotel right across from the water in Long Beach. And he said, you know, I am just struck by the numbers of people who show up at these every 2-year conferences and the growth from one conference to the next. 2007, we were all in New Orleans. Next month, we'll be in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But I remember Ethan's keynote address, and I'm going to steal the opening line and just simply repeat it from memory. As he surveyed the room, reflecting on drug policy reformers, the various paths that all brought us to this conference, the various motives that caused people to band together and work for legal change and for policy changes and so forth. And he said, who are we, us drug policy reformers? He says, I'll tell you who we are. We are people who love drugs. And about a third of the audience roared. They were mostly in the back of the room, having arrived late, but they were roaring with glee. Ethan went on to say, we are people who love the effect of drugs on our bodies. We love the release and the relief that we get at the end of the day, for example, in taking our favorite drug of choice. We are people who find creativity or support for our creativity and our imagination in taking certain drugs. We are people who relieve pain, physical and emotional. We are people who aspire to greater levels of spirituality, finding that certain drugs boost that journey. We are people who find assistance in the sexual arena through drugs. And he went on and on and on. So, we are people who love drugs. Who are we? We are people who hate drugs. We have seen dear friends and loved ones, their lives ruined or ended prematurely as a result of drug abuse. We've lost wonderful people in the entertainment field and beyond. We are people who, in short, hate drugs for the damage they have done to individuals and to families. Who are we? We are people who don't give a damn about drugs. And we are here because we care about freedom and we care about civil liberties. That's the motive of a large number of people gathered at this big conference in Long Beach. And I think he was right. I know he was right, judging from the applause from the various quarters. People who love drugs, people who hate drugs, and people who really don't care about drugs at all, but care rather about individual freedoms. I became a member of law enforcement against prohibition because I'm convinced that the drug war has caused far more harm than good. When Richard Nixon proclaimed drugs public enemy number one in 1971, and in the next breath declared all-out war on them, the clock started ticking, and the money started flowing. We have spent in the states alone $1 trillion prosecuting the drug war. We have incarcerated tens of millions of Americans for non-violent drug offenses. We have seen huge increases in violence and in public corruption as a result of prohibition and the drug war. Now, one reasonably might ask, well, what has the drug war accomplished? We've spent a lot of money on it. People have been hurt and killed. People have had their lives ruined, their student loans cut short, their public housing ended. They've been given a criminal label and a criminal record that will certainly affect their future prospects for employment. So there has been a lot of harm associated with the drug war. But what do we have to really show for it? Well, drugs today are more readily available at lower prices and higher levels of potency than when Richard Nixon declared war against them in 1971. Now, truth be told, Nixon did not declare war on drugs. That was the language that was trotted out. The reality was overheard on tapes that are now in the Nixon Library in Whittier, and in an interview that John Ehrlichman held with a reporter, and in Bob Haldeman's diaries. If those names sound the least bit familiar, they're Watergate figures. They, along with Nixon, left Washington, D.C. Much sooner than planned as a result of the Watergate scandal. But well before the Watergate scandal, in fact 2 years before, these three gentlemen were in the Oval Office talking about the Vietnam War and how that war in Southeast Asia was enormously unpopular and growing more so each day, each month. Inflation was rising. Nixon was in no way guaranteed re-election. So he is searching for a major issue, a major social initiative that, as a law and order president, he might in fact exploit. And so the three of them had this conversation. Well, we're going to roll out this drug war strategy. We're going to make a major announcement on all the networks, and we're going to make it very clear that this administration is going to embrace the idea that drugs are bad, people who take drugs are bad, and people who take drugs are criminals. People who sell drugs to people who take drugs are even worse, and that nominally represents the principal target, drug traffickers. What they also said, this coming from a man who, by the way, would get totally soused every evening on what he called his silver bullets, which were major martini glasses or goblets full of gin, and would chase Dilantin, an anti-epileptic which produces very bizarre side effects that you really don't want a president to be experiencing, particularly with one with his hand, or index finger hovering over that button. But this president said, we're going to go after the blacks, called them Negroes. We're going to go after the Negroes. We're going to go after the young people, the poor people, the riffraff, the people who are raising hell and condemning my administration. But we can't say this, of course. So what we're going to talk about and what we're going to target is their recreation, the term that he used. All three of these men confirmed that in their statements and in their reflections later. So it was really a war against young people and poor people and people of color, and especially black Americans in the U.S. And it was enormously successful, and it has been to this day. Having spent $1 trillion prosecuting that war since 1971, having invested or squandered another $69, $70 billion each year, it's safe to say that we are utterly, fully invested in the drug war in the United States of America. Beyond that, we are the desk-pounding, chest-thumping, muscle-flexing, four-star general in the war on drugs, in the global war on drugs. We will tell you, thank you very much, what your policy should be, what your domestic policies should be with respect to enforcement, prevention, education, treatment. And we reinforce that global message with money. and political clout.